I want to start by telling you about a Tuesday evening in October, not because it was the day everything fell apart, but because it was the last evening I was truly happy without knowing I had no right to be. I was sitting at my desk on the 14th floor of a glass tower in Whitefield, Bangalore. The city was doing what it always does at 7 p.m., turning golden and chaotic below me, a million headlights blinking on like stars in reverse. I had just closed the biggest product sprint of my career. 43 days of brutal work, 3 failed demos, 1 all-nighter that almost broke me, and we had finally shipped. My manager had shaken my hand in front of the entire team. My skip level had sent me a Slack message that said simply, "You're the real deal, Arjun." I remember sitting back in my chair and thinking, this is it. This is the version of my life I always wanted. My name is Arjun Mehta, 28 years old, product manager at a mid-size B2B SAI company, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Koramangala that I shared with the woman I loved, Priya. We had been together for 4 years and 3 months. Not that I was counting. Actually, I was counting because we had a reservation at a restaurant in Indiranagar to celebrate our 4-year anniversary in 12 days. I had already spoken to the manager there about putting a note on the dessert. Nothing over the top. Just a small thing. That was the kind of guy I was. Let me tell you about Priya, because if you're going to understand this story, really understand it, you need to understand her the way I did, before I understood her the way I eventually had to. Priya Nair was, without question, the most magnetic person I had ever met. She had this quality that I can only describe as gravitational, the kind of personality that rearranges the furniture of whatever room she walks into. She was 30 years old, a senior marketing manager at a consulting firm in Koramangala. Sharp, funny, with ambitions she wore openly and without apology. She laughed easily. She remembered details about people, your dog's name, the name of your grandmother, what city you grew up in, and people loved her for it. I loved her for it. We had met at a common friend's house party in 2021, during that strange post-lockdown season when everyone was overjoyed to be in the same room together again. I had spilled red wine on her white kurta and spent the next 40 minutes apologizing while she laughed at me. 3 days later, she texted first. 2 months later, she asked me to be her boyfriend on a rooftop in Yelahanka while it drizzled on us like the universe was staging a film. 4 years. That's what we had built. A shared life, shared furniture, shared weekend routines, Sunday morning filter coffee, a walk around the park near our building, arguing gently about which restaurant to try next. She knew how I took my coffee. I knew she cried at aviation accident documentaries. We had a drawer in the kitchen that was half mine, half hers. We had each other's families on our phones. So that Tuesday evening in October, I locked my laptop, texted her, shipping went great. Coming home, want to order from that Thai place? And I walked out of that glass tower feeling, for the first time in months, like everything in my life was aligned. She replied 45 minutes later. Sorry, caught up at work. Order for yourself, don't wait up. I didn't think anything of it. She was always catching up at work. That was the thing about Priya. She was driven. It was one of the things I loved about her. I ordered for myself. I ate alone. I fell asleep on the couch watching Netflix. She came home at 11:47 p.m. I was half asleep when she walked in. I remember she smelled different. Not perfume exactly, just different. Like she had been somewhere new. But it was late, and I was tired, and my brain filed it away without opening it. She kissed my forehead. I smiled without fully waking. She went to the bathroom. I fell back asleep. That was the last night of my old life. Let me tell you something about betrayal that nobody tells you. It doesn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It doesn't announce itself. It seeps in. It comes dressed as small, perfectly reasonable things. A longer workday. A reply that's a beat too slow. A laugh that stops when you enter the room. And here's the cruelest part. Your own love for the person becomes the weapon used against you. Because you love them, you explain things away. Because you trust them, you don't look. Because you believe in what you've built, you refuse to consider that the foundation might be sand. The first thing I noticed, and I mean the very first thing that registered even as a whisper of wrongness, was the phone. Priya had always been casual about her phone. She'd leave it face up on the coffee table. She'd hand it to me to play a song while she drove. She'd scroll Instagram next to me in bed without a second thought. Her password was our anniversary date. It had been for 3 years. Sometime around November, the phone started going everywhere with her. To the bathroom, to the kitchen, face down on the dining table. The screen dimmed to its lowest setting. The password changed. She said her IT department had sent a security advisory. Possible phishing attack. New company policy. I nodded. Completely plausible. Completely reasonable. She worked with corporate clients. Of course. Then there was the working late. Now, Priya had always worked hard, but there's a rhythm to a corporate professional schedule. Crunches happen around quarter end, around big pitches. But from November onward, the staying late became ambient. 3 nights a week, sometimes 4. Big client, demanding client. You know how it is. I did know how it was. I was in tech. I understood demanding clients and impossible timelines. But in December, I noticed something that I couldn't explain away, at least not right away. Her company had its year-end party. I had been to one before, the previous year. She had invited me, introduced me to her colleagues, held my hand through the whole evening. This year, she mentioned the party on a Thursday. On Friday, she said it was just a team thing, and she'd feel weird bringing a partner when most people were coming alone. On Saturday, she came home at 2 a.m., glowing, telling me it had been a good night, that the venue had been beautiful. On Sunday, I was scrolling through Instagram and one of her colleagues, a girl named Sneha who occasionally liked my posts, had uploaded a reel from the party. In the background of one shot, clearly visible, was a couple dancing together. Priya. And a man I didn't recognize. They weren't doing anything inappropriate. They were just dancing. But the way she was laughing, a head tilted back, completely unguarded, the same laugh I had fallen in love with in 2021, was directed entirely at him, and his hand was on her waist the way you put your hand on a waist when you know you're allowed to. I stared at that reel for 4 minutes. Then I put my phone down and made myself breakfast. I did not bring it up. Looking back, I cannot explain why. Maybe because I was afraid of the answer. Maybe because some part of me was already protecting myself from something I wasn't ready to face. Maybe because the alternative, that I was wrong, that I was being paranoid and jealous, felt better than the alternative that I was right. So I buried it. And here's the thing about burying things. They don't die, they grow roots. His name was Rahul Khanna. I found this out on a Wednesday in January, at a time and in a way I absolutely did not expect. Priya had asked me to drop something off at her office. She had left her laptop charger at home and had an important presentation. I didn't mind. Her office was 20 minutes from mine. I took an Uber, dropped the charger at the reception with a note. I used to leave little notes with things I dropped off for her, small dumb things like, "Go get 'em, Tiger," and I was turning to leave when I heard someone say her name. I turned around. There was a man walking across the lobby toward the elevator bank. Tall, early 30s. The kind of effortless confidence that comes with having grown up never being told no. He was wearing a well-tailored blazer and the kind of shoes you notice. Dark brown leather, clearly expensive, clearly cared for. He was talking on his phone, and as he passed the front desk, the receptionist smiled at him the way receptionists smile at senior people. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, except that he looked at Priya's charger on the reception desk, then at the note, and his jaw did something almost imperceptible, a small tightening, a flicker of something, and then he stepped into the elevator without looking back. "Who's that?" I asked the receptionist, keeping my voice light. "Mr. Rahul Khanna, head of client partnerships." Priya's department. Her senior. I drove back to my office. I opened LinkedIn during my lunch break. Rahul Khanna, 15 years of experience. An MBA from a prestigious institution. Profile picture that confirmed my memory exactly. The confidence, the blazer, the look of a man who had never been uncomfortable in any room he'd entered. And there, in his About section, in the second line, father of 2, married to Nandini. I closed LinkedIn. I went back to work. I told myself, you are being paranoid. You saw a man you don't know. You are doing math in your head that doesn't add up to anything. Stop this. And I almost managed it. Almost. February 3rd. I know the date the way you know the date of every moment that splits your life into a before and an after. I had come home early, a rare thing, a 6 p.m. departure that felt almost transgressive. Priya wasn't home. She was, according to her last text, in a client meeting that's running long. I made tea. I sat on the couch. I opened my laptop to do some light reading. And then, I heard it. Her work laptop had been left open on the dining table, connected to the charger. It wasn't unusual. She worked from home sometimes and left it out. The screen had auto-locked, but a notification had just come in, and because her notification preview was on, the first line of the message was visible on the lock screen. I wasn't going to read it. I genuinely was not. I stood up to go to the kitchen, and the text caught my eye the way something can catch your eye when it has your name in it. The message said, in its preview, first line only, "Can't wait for Saturday. Make sure Arjun doesn't." And then the preview cut off. I stood very still in my living room. I stood there for what felt like minutes, but was probably 15 seconds. And then I sat down on the couch, and I made a decision that I have never regretted. I was going to find out the truth. Not by exploding, not by confronting Priya that night, not by letting my emotions make me sloppy. Quietly, carefully, like pulling a thread. Because here's the thing. I had worked in product management for 5 years. I knew how to gather data before drawing conclusions. I knew the difference between a hypothesis and a fact. And I was determined with everything I had to be wrong. I wanted to be wrong. I was going to disprove my own theory. I didn't. Over the next 11 days, I collected facts. Fact: Priya's late nights at the office. I confirmed through a throwaway mention from her colleague Sneha, who I bumped into at a coffee shop, did not align with any actual project deadlines. Sneha had mentioned casually that their team had been pretty relaxed lately, actually no big pitches until March. Fact: Priya's phone bill, which came to our shared account because we had a joint telecom plan, showed a single number called with unusual frequency. 41 calls in January. Sometimes 5 in a single day. All between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Fact: I reverse searched that number on Truecaller. The name that came up was saved under RK, CXO's office. Rahul Khanna. Fact: On the Saturday mentioned in that notification preview, Priya told me she was going to her cousin's place in Jayanagar. I tracked our shared family location. We had it on for emergencies, something we'd set up years ago, and at 2 p.m., her phone was not in Jayanagar. It was in Indiranagar. Specifically, it was stationary for 3 hours at a location that turned out, when I looked it up, to be a boutique hotel called the Canopy Residences. 3 hours. Indiranagar. A hotel. I don't have words for what the following hours felt like. I'm going to try anyway, because I think you deserve the honesty of it. It felt like the floor of my entire life had opened up. Not crashed. Opened. Like I was standing on solid ground, and then I looked down and realized I had been standing on a painting of solid ground. That the real floor was somewhere much further below, and I had no idea how far I was going to fall. I sat in my car. I had driven to Indiranagar. I'm not proud of this, but I had, and I watched the entrance of that hotel for 45 minutes. I didn't get out. I didn't go in. I just sat there with the air conditioning off and the windows up and the city noise muffled by glass, and I tried to breathe. At 4:17 p.m., they walked out together. Priya and Rahul Khanna. She was wearing the green kurta I had complimented her on that morning. He was wearing the shoes I remembered. She laughed at something he said. He touched the small of her back briefly as he guided her toward the road. A small gesture, a practiced proprietary gesture, the gesture of someone who was used to touching that person. They got into separate Ubers. I sat in my car for another 30 minutes. Then I started the engine and drove home. When Priya got back that evening, smelling of a perfume I didn't recognize, I was on the couch watching a cricket match with the volume low. "How was your cousins?" I asked. "Good," she said, dropping her bag. "Same old, you know how it is." "Yeah," I said, "I know how it is." She made herself tea, sat beside me, leaned her head on my shoulder. I let her. And I looked at the television screen and I said nothing, and my heart was breaking completely quietly, the way expensive things break. No noise, just a clean, total fracture. That was the night I stopped being naive. What followed was the most psychologically difficult 3 weeks of my life. And I've had difficult times. I lost my father when I was 23. That nearly broke me. But this was a different kind of pain. Because grief from loss is clean. There is no perpetrator. There is no betrayal. This pain had a face. It wore a green kurta. It leaned its head on my shoulder. I need to be honest with you. I considered confronting her immediately. Every single day I considered it. I would practice the words in the shower. I would write them in the Notes app on my phone and delete them. I wanted so badly to grab the world by its collar and make it make sense. But I didn't. And here is why. Because I had been shown in those 11 days of fact-gathering that Priya was an excellent, experienced liar. Not a frantic, clumsy liar. A calm, detail-oriented one. She had managed parallel lives, her real one and the one she performed for me, with what I can only describe as professional competence. Which meant that if I confronted her with emotion and without evidence, she would dismantle me. She would tell me I was paranoid. She would make me feel small for suspecting her. And I had heard enough stories from enough people to know that this is exactly what cheating partners who are good at it do. They flip the script so fast that the person who got cheated on ends up apologizing. I was not going to apologize. So I planned. I consulted a lawyer, a friend of my uncle's who practiced family law in Vasantnagar. I explained the situation. She listened without judgment and advised me on what documentation would be relevant, not for any legal proceeding but for protecting my interests in the shared apartment. We had been in a live-in relationship. There were shared financial obligations. The apartment lease was in both our names. I opened a separate bank account and began quietly routing my savings there. I took screenshots of the call logs on the shared phone account, of the location data, of everything I had gathered. I stored them on a cloud drive that was not connected to any device Priya had access to. And then, on a Sunday evening in late February, something happened that I did not plan for. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't pick it up. I did. "Hello," said the voice on the other end. A woman's voice. Steady, but with something fragile underneath it. "Is this Arjun Mehta, Priya's partner?" "Yes," I said. "My name is Nandini Khanna," she said. "I believe our partners know each other." I met Nandini at a cafe in Sadashivanagar, far from either of our neighborhoods, on a Monday afternoon when I had taken a half-day from work. She was 34. Composed in the way of someone who had had several days to cry privately before this meeting and was now operating on willpower and clarity. She had 2 children, 4 and 6 years old. She had been married to Rahul for 8 years. She had found out 3 months before I did. A hotel receipt in his jacket pocket, because some clichés are clichés for a reason. She had confronted him. He had cried. He had promised it was over. And then she had found in January a message on his phone that told her it was not over, had never been over, and that the woman he was seeing had a name, Priya, and worked in his office. She had investigated the way I had. Carefully, quietly, and she had found me through Priya's Instagram, which was still public. He found a photo of us together from a trip we'd taken to Korg in 2023. I almost didn't call, she told me. I didn't know what kind of person you were. I didn't know if you already knew. I didn't know if you were even still with her. Still with her, I confirmed. Still very much in the dark. We sat across from each other and shared, in clinical, careful terms, everything we each knew. It was one of the strangest experiences of my life, sitting with a stranger and mapping together the geography of a betrayal that had been built across our two lives like a bridge between ruins. She told me things that rearranged the timeline for me. This had not started, as I had assumed, sometime around November. Nandini believed it had started at a company off-site in Goa. August, 14 months ago. 14 months. While I was celebrating her promotion with a dinner I'd planned for 2 weeks, Rahul Khanna had been in the adjacent column of her life, occupying a space I didn't know existed. While I was signing lease renewals and talking about where we'd travel next year, she had been managing 2 realities with a calendar I wasn't allowed to see. 14 months. I drove home in silence. I sat in the parking lot of our building for 25 minutes before I could go upstairs. The next week I performed. It was the hardest acting I have ever done, and I have never auditioned for anything in my life. I woke up beside Priya every morning and made coffee and talked about the weather and about her day. I sat across from her at dinner. I watched the shows we watched together. I laughed at the right moments. I was present and warm and exactly the boyfriend she thought she still had. Inside, I was a different person entirely. I was methodical. I was closing doors one by one, so gently that she didn't hear a single one click. I spoke to my HR department about transferring to our Bengaluru office's expansion team, which was going to be relocating to Hyderabad in April. This was a role I had been offered and gently declined 6 months earlier. I called my contact and told her I'd reconsidered. She was delighted. The paperwork started. I spoke to my building manager about removing my name from the lease. Priya's income was more than sufficient to maintain it alone, and I had already spoken to the lawyer about this. It would be clean, no drama. Just a formal removal. I called my mother, not to explain everything, but to tell her I was going through something and that I would be home in Pune for a week soon. She said, in the way mothers say things when they already know more than you've told them, "Come whenever you're ready, Arjun. I'll make dal." I had by this point given myself a date. March 15th, a Saturday. 3 weeks away. And then, 11 days before March 15th, Priya handed me something I had not expected. She handed me the perfect exit. We were having dinner. She had been slightly distracted all through the meal, which I now recognized for exactly what it was. And then, halfway through her food, she put her fork down and said, "Arjun, I need to tell you something." My chest went very still. I think I've been feeling really disconnected lately. From us. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I feel like we've grown in different directions over the past year, and I think we should talk about where this relationship is going. There it was. The setup. I had heard about this move, the preemptive pivot. The cheating partner, sensing that something is wrong or simply ready to upgrade, who initiates the relationship problems conversation, to gain the moral high ground before the truth emerges. Plant the seed that the relationship was already failing, so that when things unravel, the narrative is about compatibility rather than betrayal. I looked at her across our dining table. I looked at the apartment we had built together. I thought about the reservation I had canceled at that restaurant in Indiranagar, quietly a week earlier without telling her. I thought about the note I had planned to leave on the dessert. I thought about the version of me who had sat in that glass tower in October, feeling like everything was aligned. And then I said something I had been rehearsing for weeks. "I think you're right, Priya. I think we've grown in different directions, and I think it's time we were honest with each other." She looked surprised. She had expected pushback, emotion, the conversation she could manage. She hadn't expected agreement. "I've been offered a transfer to Hyderabad," I said, calmly, conversationally. I accepted it last week. I'll be moving in April. She stared at me. And there's something else, I continued. I've been doing some thinking of my own. A lot of thinking, actually. I reached into the folder I had placed beside my chair before dinner. She had seen it and assumed it was work, and I placed 3 printed pages on the table. The call logs. The location data. A screenshot of a message Nandini had forwarded me, from Rahul's phone to Priya's, dated December 18th, which contained enough detail to be unambiguous. I know about Rahul Khanna, I said. I've known for a while. The silence in our apartment was absolute. Priya looked at the papers. She looked at me. Something moved across her face, a complex series of calculations happening at speed. I watched the different versions of the next moment play across her expression. Denial, tears, anger, bargaining. I watched her choose and discard each one. And finally, quietly, she said, "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. "Arjun, You don't have to explain," I said. And I meant it. Not from a place of forgiveness. From a place of having already let go. The lease is being transferred to your name next week. The paperwork is already in progress. I'm going to stay at Dev's place for the next few weeks. When I come back to get my things, I'd prefer it if you weren't home. I'll let you know the date. I stood up. I picked up my folder. The restaurant in Indiranagar, I said, because I wanted her to know I had been about to fight for this. I had a note planned for the dessert. Something small. That was 12 days ago. I walked to the bedroom, took the bag I had packed 3 days earlier, and left. Dev, my best friend since engineering college, now a senior data scientist at a fintech startup in Bangalore, had a 2-bedroom apartment in HSR layout that had always felt like a satellite of home to me. He had known for the past month that something was coming. I had told him in broad strokes what I had found. He had offered his couch before I asked. When I showed up at 9:30 p.m. with my bag and a face like a landslide, he opened the door, stepped aside and said, "Whiskey or beer?" "Whiskey," I said. We talked for 3 hours. And by the end of it, something strange and profound had happened. I had stopped crying about what I'd lost and started thinking, clearly and for the first time, about what came next. This is the thing no one tells you about the end of a long relationship that was built on a lie. Once you know it was a lie, the grief becomes complicated. Because what exactly are you grieving? The relationship as it existed was, in significant part, a fiction. You are grieving the version of it that lived in your own head, the real and earnest love you put in, alongside something that was never what you thought. And grief that complicated doesn't have a clean arc. It doesn't resolve on a schedule. What I had instead was anger. And I chose to do something very deliberate with that anger. I turned it into fuel. The Hyderabad transfer was, it turned out, the best professional decision of my life. The expansion team I was joining was small, ambitious, and working on a product that I found genuinely exciting. Within 6 weeks of arriving, I was de facto leading a sub-team. Within 3 months, my manager, who had followed my work from the Bengaluru office, had recommended me for a principal PM role. I also, and this sounds cliché, but I need to say it, I started running. Not jogging, running. 5 a.m. every day, regardless of weather, regardless of how late I'd worked. I had always been reasonably fit but soft in the way of someone who prioritizes comfort. Within 4 months, I had run a half marathon and registered for a full one. I had cut 15 kilograms. I had a tailor in Hyderabad who made me 2 suits. I want to be honest about something, none of this healed me. Not immediately. Healing is slower and less cinematic than people admit. There were nights in Hyderabad when I sat on my balcony with a beer and felt the full, undecorated weight of what had happened. 4 years, a shared drawer, a note on a dessert that was never delivered. Those nights were real and they were hard, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But they became less frequent, and one day I realized I had gone a full week without thinking about it. And then a full weekend. And at some point, I couldn't tell you exactly when, It stopped being the organizing fact of my emotional life and became simply something that had happened to me. One chapter, not the whole book. I want to tell you about Nandini because her story matters and because she handled everything with a dignity that I still think about. She did not throw Rahul out immediately. She had 2 children and a mortgage, and she was not going to make a decision about her family in a state of raw emotion. Instead, she did what I had done. She planned. She consulted a lawyer. She secured documentation. She spoke to a marriage counselor, not to save the marriage, but to have a clinical professional's assessment of the situation on record, which turned out to be relevant later. 3 months after our coffee in Sadashivanagar, she filed for divorce. The company's HR department received, through proper legal channels during the proceedings, a document establishing that a senior manager had engaged in a workplace relationship that violated the firm's conflict of interest policy. He had been managing her performance reviews during the course of the affair. This cost Rahul Khanna not his job immediately, but his partnership track, the corner office he had been angling toward, the director role that had been 3 months away. I did not engineer this. Nandini did. On her own, through her lawyer. I only know about it because she messaged me once, months later, not gloating. Nandini was not a person who gloated, but simply to say, "I think you should know that I'm going to be okay. I hope you are too." I replied, "I am. Take care of yourself." I never spoke to her again. But I think about that message sometimes. I think about the particular courage of a woman rebuilding her life with 2 children and a fractured trust. I have enormous respect for her. 4 months after I left Bengaluru, on a Tuesday evening in July, my phone rang. Priya. I stared at her name on the screen for a long time. Then I let it go to voicemail. She left a message. Her voice was different, quieter, without the confident current that usually ran through it. She said she had been thinking about what she'd done. That she had made a mistake she couldn't explain. That she missed me. That she had ended things with Rahul. That she had been thinking about us a lot lately. She called again 3 days later. Then again the following week. On the 4th call, I picked up. Not because I was considering anything, but because I felt she deserved a clear answer rather than silence, and I wanted to give it to her face to face, or voice to voice at least. Priya, I said. Arjun. Her voice broke slightly on my name. I've been trying to reach you. I know. I've had a lot of time to think. What I did. Priya, I said, gently but with complete finality, I am not angry at you anymore. I want you to hear that clearly. But I also want you to hear this. There is no version of this that ends with us back together. Not because I hate you, because I don't. But because what happened wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, made repeatedly for 14 months. And I can't build something on that. I don't want to. A long silence. I understand, she said very quietly. I hope you're okay, I said, and I meant it. I genuinely do. Are you okay? She asked. I looked out my Hyderabad apartment window at a new city doing its evening thing. Traffic and noise and light and the distant smell of rain on hot pavement. I thought about the half-marathon medal on my shelf. About the promotion letter I had printed out and sent to my mother. About the dinner I had last week with a colleague named Mira who had laughed, really laughed, at something I said. Yeah, I told Priya, I'm doing really well. I meant that too. I ran into Rahul Khanna once, by complete coincidence, 8 months after everything. I was at a conference in Bengaluru, an industry event for product and growth professionals. He was there as a speaker, though when I arrived he had already been moved to a smaller panel, I noticed. The corner office energy was diminished. The shoes were the same. He saw me across the venue. I know he recognized me because his jaw did the same small tight thing it had done in the lobby of Priya's office building on that day in January when I had dropped off her charger. This time I did not look away. I held eye contact across the room for exactly 2 seconds, then turned back to my conversation. He did not approach me. I did not approach him. There was nothing to say. He was living whatever consequences his choices had produced, and they were not my business. Revenge, I had come to understand, is not something you do. It's something that happens, naturally and without your intervention, to people who make terrible choices. You don't need to engineer it. You just need to refuse to be destroyed by it. I want to end this story, not with justice, though I believe justice was eventually served, quietly and completely, and not with revenge, though that too found its own level, but with something smaller and more important. Her name is Mira. We met at work. She was the lead researcher on a project I was managing, quiet and precise and funny in a way that sneaks up on you. On our first actual conversation, in the office pantry, over terrible instant coffee, she said something so dryly, perfectly witty about our company's product roadmap that I laughed out loud for the first time in months. Real laughter. The unplanned kind. We became friends first. 3 months of friendship. The slow, honest kind where you actually know a person before you think about them as anything else. I told her what had happened with Priya. All of it. She listened without making it into a crisis or a lesson. She just listened, and at the end she said, "That sounds like it was really painful. I'm glad you got out." That was it. No advice, no judgment, just presence. We had our first date on a Tuesday evening in Hyderabad, at a small rooftop restaurant that neither of us had chosen for any reason except that it looked nice and the weather was perfect. We talked for 4 hours. We split the bill. She beat me at a terrible pun war that was embarrassing for both of us. I walked home afterward and sat on my balcony with the beer I'd gotten into the habit of having in the evenings, and I looked at the city that had become mine, at the life that had been rebuilt from scratch with better materials, and I felt something that took me a moment to identify. It was peace. Real, unqualified peace. Not the absence of pain that had been around for a while. Something more positive than absence. A presence. The presence of a life I had made deliberately, on the other side of the worst year I had ever had, and it was good. It was genuinely, quietly, solidly good. I've told this story in detail because I think the details matter. Because there's a version of this story that becomes a revenge fantasy, and the revenge is real, and it was satisfying, and I won't pretend otherwise. But the more important story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when you refuse to let someone else's failure become the defining fact of your life. Priya made choices. They were her choices, and I am no longer responsible for understanding them or carrying them. Rahul Khanna made choices. They cost him things: his marriage, his career trajectory, the particular version of his life he had been building. These were the natural consequences of those choices, not things I arranged. What I arranged was this. I arranged my own next chapter, carefully, with dignity, and on my own terms. The therapist I started seeing in Hyderabad, yes, I went to therapy, yes, I am recommending it, yes, unconditionally, said something to me in our 3rd session that I wrote down and still have. The person who cheated on you will spend a long time wondering why you stopped fighting for the relationship. The answer is that you were fighting for something better. I was. I am. If you're going through something like this right now, here's what I want to tell you. Not as advice, because your situation is yours, and I don't know the specifics. Just as one person talking to another. The worst moment, the moment you realize the truth, will feel like an ending. It is not an ending. It is the first moment of something new, disguised as destruction. Feel everything. Cry in the parking lot if you need to. Sit on your best friend's couch at 9:30 p.m. with a bag you packed 3 days early. Let yourself be angry. Let yourself grieve something that was real and yours even when it was being treated as if it wasn't. And then, when you're ready, and you will know when you're ready, gather your things. Turn toward the next version of your life. Build it better. Build it truer. Build it with people who understand the value of what they have. Because here is the thing I know now, that I didn't know on that Tuesday evening in October when I was sitting in a glass tower feeling like everything was aligned. Real alignment doesn't feel like luck. It doesn't feel like something you're afraid to examine too closely in case it falls apart. It feels like standing on actual ground. Solid, yours. I'm standing on mine now. And it's worth everything I went through to get here. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt familiar, or made you feel a little less alone in something you're going through, then you're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Stories like Arjun's don't get told enough. Not the full version, not the messy, honest, complicated version, where the ending isn't a dramatic explosion but a quiet, deliberate walk towards something better. We tell those stories here, every single week. If you want more, hit the like button. It takes 1 second and it genuinely helps more people find these stories who might need them right now. And if you want to be here when the next one drops, subscribe. Turn on the bell if you don't want to miss it. We're building something real here, and every person who joins makes it a little more worth building. If this story reminded you of someone, a friend going through something, someone who needs to hear that there's a version of this that ends okay, share it with them. Sometimes the right story at the right time changes how a person sees their situation. Maybe this is that story for someone you know. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.